What's up, y'all? And of course, welcome to another Alternative Factuals video. And I'm recording this video on June 19th, as what we African Americans call as black people, Juneteenth. We got some news today where, more and more states are starting to register this as a holiday, even though it should have been a holiday. But let's not talk about that. Let's not get into the details of that. Let's talk about Marvel Comics, the racist history behind Marvel Comics. And I say that because we're going to be talking about technically by definition, the first black Captain America there was. And most people don't remember him. Most people don't even think about him. We're going to be talking about Isaiah Bradley. But before I dive into the details and the subject matters of this video, please be sure to like, share, and of course subscribe. Leave your comments down below. Let me know what you're thinking. Let me know what you're feeling. And let me know any characters or any concepts you want me to discuss in the comments down below. And without further and or possible ado, let's kind of just talk about this. Let's kind of vibe. So, Isaiah Bradley. Obviously, he's a character that shows up in Marvel Comics, and he's depicted as a product of the United States Super Soldier Serum, aka Project Rebirth. Now, Isaiah Bradley actually made his first appearance in Truth, Red, White, and Black #1 of January 2003. Now, what makes this very interesting is this project in general was obviously a way for them to try and figure out how to get the Super Soldier Serum after Captain America. Now, believe it or not, he was not the first Captain America. Captain America, Steve Rogers, was the first Captain America. There has been some mixed history about it, some retconning and stuff eventually that took place, but from, I think right now, what's in continuity is the simple fact that he was basically technically the second who received some sort of Super Soldier Serum. But what makes this, the reason why I said the racist history behind Marvel Comics and the truth behind, Captain America's history is because in this 7-issue series, basically that was written by Robert Morales and basically was drawn by Kyle Baker, was the fact that it focused on Isaiah Bradley, who was one of the 300 African American soldiers who was experimented on by the U.S. Army. And for those of you who don't know, this was set in basically a series that takes place during the Tuskegee experiments as, basically it was kind of inspired by the Tuskegee experiments, not directly the Tuskegee experiments, because if that was the case, it was about super soldier serums, but that would be kind of twisted. But basically it just redoes or reimagines the history of the Tuskegee experiments for the sake of saying that it was for the super soldier serum that created Captain America. So this all kind of takes place around 1942. So you can kind of understand what things were like during that time and the reason why it follows this particular black soldier during this whole situation when it comes to the whole Project Rebirth and them experimenting on black people and experimenting to mutations and death and all that stuff. And after the 300 soldiers, only Isaiah Bradley survived. Now, if you don't know what he basically could do in terms of his abilities and powers, because of the type of super soldier serum he actually received physically, he is, technically by definition, like Captain America, the perfect human. So he has amazing agility, amazing dexterity, peak levels of human strength, speed, endurance, reflex, and reaction time, along with coordination and balance that are superior to any Olympic athlete that will ever live. And once it was metabolized, his body was basically able to enhance all of his bodily functions to peak levels of efficiency, meaning he has enhanced healing factor. His fatigue does not build up in his muscles nearly as quick, and basically he's immune to all natural diseases. And his aging process, as we already know, has been slowed dramatically, much like Captain America. Now, what most people don't know is that even though he received a version of the, Super Soldier Serum, or that version of the Super Soldier Serum, ultimately it was relatively incomplete. Most people don't really know that he, suffers from a very huge mental issue due to the nature of the incomplete Super Soldier Serum. And Captain America did find this out, and eventually he did try to reconcile with basically Isaiah, who at the time when Steve Rogers actually kind of tried to reconciliate with Isaiah, at that point, because of this serum, because of this incomplete and the long-term effects of this serum, even though physically his body was peak levels of condition, so to speak, his mind and like, you know, certain aspects of his body was very childlike, because he basically showed the same kind of traits as Alzheimer's. And for those of you who may have had family who, you know, had Alzheimer's, or maybe anyone you know who's had Alzheimer's, or even if you've just seen the effects of Alzheimer's, it's almost like mentally they're de-aging. So if you're, let's say you're in your 40s, for example, you act like you're, you know, middle-aged person, you know what to do, you've been living your entire life for the, you know, past 40 years. It's like as your mind begins to, you know, regress to a younger state, more and more information you start to use, as well as even things like the coordination start to decrease, because that is still information your brain has to hold on a daily basis. Even though it's like relatively passive information, your mind still has to hold it. So basically his body was starting to fail simply because his mind was going. So his coordination wasn't as good. You know, the things that the super soldier serum enhanced, or the incomplete version of the super soldier serum that it enhanced, basically it was just, you know, causing his body to regress to a younger state, and basically his body was failing, and so he just was not okay. Now, the reason I want to talk about this, especially on this particular day, and the reason why I'm very adamant about recording it today, because I just felt very motivated to do so, is because this is a part of Marvel Comics that, you know, a lot of people don't really talk about or try to say doesn't exist, and that, you know, they're trying to say comics were never really political. And that is absolutely a bold-faced lie. I don't care what anyone tells you, that is a lie. Comics were created during political times, and were created during times of war to, you know, promote propaganda. So you can't say like, you know, comics were never political. A lot of these scenarios and issues that happen, not just around black characters in general, but also around like other characters like Captain America, they do actually have foundations in very racial and political issues, just due to the nature of the time that they take place. You cannot ignore history when it comes to comic books, especially when you're basing things on real life. So this is something that I wanted to bring to people's attention, that this is a Captain America that, yes, he was very much, you know, physically gifted, much like Captain America. He was enhanced by Captain America. But what makes this really, really interesting, and what makes this really, really something that people need to pay attention to more and more, is the simple fact that this is a black man who was, by all definition, was a part of Marvel's version of the Tuskegee experiments, which, if you know, in real life, that was a real thing. And for years, the United States government made it seem like this was just some sort of conspiracy theory. Black people made this up, until those files were made public, and then it was confirmed that the Tuskegee experiment was designed specifically to experiment on black people, to see how they mutate, also to see specifically how black people can deal with pain, how black people can actually interact with certain chemicals in their blood, because they, for some reason, they just thought we were alien just because we were darker skinned. So they wanted to see how we reacted to certain things, and the government eventually came clean about this, even though for many, many years this was deemed as, like I said, a simple conspiracy. But this is a character everyone should know about. This is someone who I think everyone should pay attention to. Isaiah Bradley, as well as he does have a son who came into the picture a little later, and basically I think his son is Josiah, if I remember correctly. I believe, is it Josiah? I'm not completely sure. Yes, the son's name is Josiah. Now, his son, I'm not going to get into details about that, because I guess I want to leave room for other people to talk about it, because this is something I think everyone should really take the time to get to know, especially if you're a person of color, if you're someone who's black. This is information about comic books you need to realize, you need to understand, you need to know. This is information that is public, and this is information that you need to make yourself aware of when it comes to Marvel Comics, DC Comics. These characters are out there, and these characters are rich in history, and I think everyone should take the time to just, you know, read up on these characters, realize who these characters are, get information about them. And believe it or not, even though Isaiah Bradley is not talked about nearly as much compared to many, many, many other characters, even as much as Blue Marvel, for example, because I guess he was created a little bit more recently, but in terms of Marvel history, he was extremely important to the development of Project Rebirth when it came to making super soldiers. He was one of the founding people when it came to that project, simply because they were able to realize what they did right and what they did wrong, but obviously it cost him the price of his mind, his peace of mind, as well as the deterioration of his body due to the Alzheimer's-like symptoms. So don't ever forget that. Isaiah Bradley is one of the reasons why some people like Wolverine was able to even, do what he does in such ways, shapes, and forms. Because during the time, I think, when Isaiah Bradley was actually experimenting on at least one version of this story, was that he got experimented on, and then Wolverine got experimented on, got the adamantium claws added onto him at a later date. Because if you remember correctly, Wolverine did not always have the metal on his claws. That was something that happened later in the process. So Isaiah Bradley in one version of this story was the main reason this was going on, and he is very important, and I think he needs to make a comeback. I think in a lot of ways people need to give him a little bit more clout. People need to, pay attention to his character more, his family more. His family is very, very rich in history in terms of Marvel history, period. His wife, his son, just the experiment that took place around him, his comrades, the people he dealt with over the course of his lifetime. All that stuff is extremely important, and I think Marvel Comics needs to make a nice little mini series, or at least a solo run for a little bit, and experiment with that, at least for Black History Month. Do a little something, anything at this point, but I can't force a comic book company to do something like that. This is where we come in. We can tell these stories, or we can make what if scenarios, and that's what this channel is for. So if you want to see something like that in the future, where I can make what if stories based on the information that we know about these characters, I'll leave it in the comments below. Let me know how you're feeling. But if you're new to the channel, please be sure to like, share, and of course subscribe. Leave your comments down below, and I hope to see you later on. Peace out.